All right, welcome everybody to the first panel on the final day of TBRCon 2022. The topic we'll be discussing today is something I'm very passionate about, especially as a new father. We're going to be digging into parenting in science fiction and fantasy. Also, thank you to our sponsor for this episode, Angry Robot Books. Just kidding. It just so happens that all of our panelists today are Angry Robot authors, and that is all due to Caroline Lamb, who helped to come up with the idea for this panel and gather all the authors. So a very heartfelt thank you to her. And I will let my lovely guests introduce themselves now. So when I call your name, if you could tell viewers a little bit about yourself, your books, and we'll start with Ron Walters.
Hey, I'm Ron Walters. I'm the author of Deep Dive. It's a sci-fi thriller that came out almost 3 weeks ago now. I live in Germany, but I'm originally from the States. I've got 2 kids.
And you have beautiful hair. Beautiful.
Thank you. Honestly, like this is total pandemic hair, and I don't know what to do with it at this point. I'm not getting rid of it because I spent too long just letting it go, but now I think I've let it go. So,
oh man,
yeah,
you've let it go to you've let it go to the point of perfection. It's awesome.
I appreciate that. I'm just gonna hang up now because this can't get better than that comment.
That's true. Yeah, we're not even going to talk about parenting. We're just going to talk about Ron's hair. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hair in science fiction and fantasy.
Honestly, during my launch that we had, one of my friends was trolling the dude who was moderating it for me by asking questions about what I use in my hair. It was great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Dude. All right. Well, Alex, who has shorter hair than Ron, how are you? Alex Thompson.
Thanks. I regret. I literally had a haircut a couple of weeks ago, and I would have had a nice shaggy mane to show you if I'd. Yeah, no comments, I'm afraid. Yeah, my name's Alex Thompson. I'm the author of Spider Touch, which came out last month, and that's fantasy about a city ruled by an alien race that has a touch language rather than a spoken language. And I'm a languages teacher. Full time, and I've got 2 kids, 8 and 10.
Awesome. And Dan Hanks, tell everyone a bit about yourself.
Well, I am Dan Hanks. I am the author of Captain Moxley and the Embers of the Empire and Swashbucklers. And Swashbucklers is very much a Ghostbusters, but as parents kind of thing, which is based on my experience of having two boys of 10 and 11 years old.
Fantastic. And Caroline Hardaker?
I'm Caroline. I'm the author of Composite Creatures, which is a dark, dystopian, domestic sci-fi horror, dare I say. But I'm also a poet as well. So I have 2 poetry collections, which are kind of folky and mythologic-y as well. And I have a one-year-old boy. And a massive cat, which is also a child.
I saw the tail flicking in the screen earlier.
I know, it looked weird, didn't it? Was it that corner?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looked like a tentacle. But yes, so I've got a giant cat who
an eldritch cat.
A little bit, yeah. If she leaps across the screen, you'll understand. She's huge. But yes, and I've also got lots of colds and bugs, so I'll be the one coughing throughout the panel.
It's all good. And Gabriela Houston, how are you? Can you tell everyone a bit about yourself?
Hi, so I'm Gabriela. I'm a Polish-British author of Slavic folklore and mythology-inspired fantasy for adults. I wrote The Second Bell, which is a mother and daughter against the world kind of story, and The Wind Child, which is my children's book coming out, about the granddaughter of the god of winter winds who sets out on an epic journey to bring her father back from the dead. So very strong parenting vibes in both of them. I also have 2 kids and 2 cats to match.
All right. What's more work, the cats or the kids? This goes for Caroline.
Well, at some point, the kids learn to sort of, do their own toilet. So.
The cats
I think they've both got their needs. They've both got very particular needs.
They do.
To be fair,
they're both special.
Both special. To be fair, I don't think I'd mind if the 1-year-old pooed in a box like the cat did. I think in a way it might be easier. But yeah, they've both got their very particular needs.
And my friend Crystal Matar is on the chat, and she told me, I guarantee shit's going to come up in the conversation tomorrow. And it's been 5 minutes, and we already have poo talk. So there you go, Crystal.
Straight into it.
Yeah. And I didn't introduce myself as the moderator. I'm Adrian M. Gibson. I write for fanfiaddict.com, doing reviews and essays and stuff like that. And I'm also the host of SFF Addicts podcast, which you can check out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that stuff. And then also on the YouTube channel for Fanfi Addict, I upload video there as well. Yeah, we got some strong parenting vibes all across the board here. Everyone has kids. I also have a son. He's coming up on 18 months old. And it's a very strange time for children at that point. But then again, there is no non-strange time for kids. And I feel like everyone here has had the opportunity to incorporate their experiences and their journeys as parents into their writing in some way or another. But to start the conversation off on a more sentimental note, I want to know, what does being a parent mean to you? So we'll start with you, Ron.
I was trying to think if we could answer this earlier. I think mostly just making sure they're safe. Honestly, I worry all the time. I mean, you know, whether it's a little cough or, you know, like I said, falling in a puddle or riding their bike through the park and they come back and their knees just bleeding. It's just, yeah, constant worry, I think, as much as, you know, the love's there. It's just, I think that comes with the worry. And as they get older, it changes. But yeah, just wanted to make sure that you actually keep these kids you brought into the world safe without being too much of like a helicopter parent. Exactly. And that's a hard line to ride. So, and
it's also very personal too. I mean,
right,
sure
it changes from person to person. Exactly,
is.
how I do that with my kids will be completely different from everyone, you know, on the panel in the world. So,
and they're somewhat a product of you too. So,
which is for good or ill, yeah.
So. And Alex, what about you? What does being a parent mean to you?
I think when they were toddlers and babies, I think that was the time when I felt more sentimental about it, which was probably a mixture of kind of hormones and exhaustion and stuff. But now that when they get a bit older, I don't know, I feel like I've stepped into the shoes a lot more comfortably of just enjoying it. And now I feel like my role is to kind of make the bad dad jokes and to pretend not to understand all their acronyms and Roblox nonsense and plot and Inspector Gadget. You know, that feels like my role now, and I'm at ease with it. I'm comfortable with it.
You're in a good place. Oh man, I'm jealous.
Yeah. Good time. Before they get teenagers, but post toddlers. It's good.
You're in the sweet spot.
Yeah.
And Caroline, what about you?
Well, I suppose I'm probably the earliest in the journey because I've only been doing it for a year. And I guess for me, it's just a constant thought process to try and make sure that he ends up quite balanced and happy and trying to learn what I'm doing. So basically, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know if all of you were the same. I have no idea.
Oh, yeah.
And at the moment, I think I'm just constantly trying to make sure that he has the best foundation to be a good person. And maybe this will fade out a little bit as he gets older and I get more and more tired of doing this. But at the moment, I've still got the energy to do it. So yeah, for me, it's just trying to help him be a good, balanced, happy little person who can hopefully go off and be good and happy with everybody else as well. But every day I feel different, so we'll see. Depending on how tired I am.
And while you still have the energy, just put it all.
Yeah,
in
no.
as much as
the
you
novelty
can.
might wear off in 6 months. So I'm just like, well, I don't know. Ask me.
I'm at 18 months, now I'm spent. No.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that'll be me in 6 months too.
And Dan, what about you?
Well, I think Caroline, you've just touched on it. It changes constantly. Being a parent initially was about, you know, being there for night feeds when you needed to and rocking them to sleep. And now today was about consoling my son after, you know, his team got caned in the football, and then taking his friend back home and rushing back for this. And it's sort of every day it changes, and with each stage of their life it changes, and it's nothing how I pictured it, and it's yet still feels everything I wanted it to be. So it's a difficult question to ask and answer.
But you're all giving beautiful answers, and I'm really appreciative of that. And we'll close out that question with Gabriela.
Well, I think, you know, once you accept that nobody has the answers, and that nobody really knows what we're doing. You're just trying to do your best. I think that's a good place to start, to sort of not, I mean, aside, everyone wants their kids to be safe all the time and to be happy all the time, and that's not going to happen. So as long as they feel safe with you, and as long as you are the person that they're happy around and that they want to go to when it's not safe outside, then you're doing okay. Just enjoying each other's company as much as you can.
Yeah, and like Caroline says, like giving them the tools they need to just be a good person. And
yeah, I mean, you can't shield them indefinitely from everything, in the world. So I think you have to prepare them for it. But even as adults, I don't know about you guys, how well adjusted you are, but I don't feel like I'm always very well prepared for the world out there. So I think, so I think that's part of it. It's like you're kind of learning alongside them and you're trying to figure things out alongside them.
Exactly. It's this like symbiotic relationship where you're learning from each other and discovering truths about yourself through the mistakes that you make as a parent.
Yeah, I feel like I'm constantly, even though, I've got years ahead, hopefully, but, years of this, but I feel like I'm constantly changing shape to kind of fit around him in a way. So he changes every day at the moment. He's always doing something new and or experiencing something in a different way, or just a completely different mood. And I have to change around him to fit that. So I feel like for me, it's being a bit of a shapeshifter as well. Yeah. If that makes any sense.
It's like as a child, you're malleable clay, and then as a parent, you're exactly the same. And you're just molding each other.
Especially when you add a second one into it, because you get used to, we have ours are 3 years apart. So it's 12 and 9 now. And so when my oldest was 3, we had the second one. And I was like, oh, I know what I'm doing. And the second she showed up, I was like, I have no fucking idea. Although she was so different, I mean,
yeah, I have to say back to like what Caroline was saying about like molding the child and molding yourself. Like when you read her book, it takes on a really creepy meaning. So if you haven't read her book yet, keep that comment in mind.
Yes.
Well, on that note, let's get into the writing. Crystal, once again, she dropped an amazing comment. Having no idea what I'm doing is a parenting mood and a writing mood. And yes, 100% agreed. So when it comes to your writing, why did you choose to incorporate aspects of parenthood into your fiction? And why was it important for you to do so? So we'll start with you, Caroline.
Well, I wrote Composite Creatures before I had a child. Though it's interesting because a lot of people have said, oh, you must have had a child to write this. I was like, well, I had my cat. And my cat was pretty influential in writing it. But I wanted to write about parenthood, not just in terms of having children, but also being a child as well. Because in Composite Creatures, it's this... It's a difficult story to talk about without giving too much away, but there's basically a chain of parenting going on, and the main character is highly affected by her mother, and she in turn passes that on. But I wanted to write about it because how we are parented shapes how we see the world in so many ways, which we could possibly never even understand. And when we parent, we might be passing some of that on subconsciously or consciously. And it's interesting how the nature nurture thing comes in, because I did want to write about that quite a bit, as in how much do we pass on genetically and how much is learned. So for me, it was a bit more of an academic look at it, because I wasn't a parent when I wrote it. And now that I am, I really need to go back and reread my own book.
Yes, of course you do.
What am I thinking of? Yeah, so that was my perspective on it. That's why I wanted to write about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And Alex, what about you? What did you want to convey about parenthood in your writing, and why did you choose to incorporate that?
I think for me, the thing that most interested me was the lengths we go to protect our kids. Some people will go to such extremes to make sure that their kids are safe in a way that I don't think we would necessarily do with us to protect ourselves or our friends or our partners or anything. it's such a strong motivating factor. And so my main character was someone who was quite a compliant everyman, who does what he's told. And I was quite interested in, what might push him over the edge, what might turn him into this, from a quisling into a figure of the resistance who will actually rebel and fight. And I found for me that was the big thing, the desire to protect your kids, which would push you to do something you'd never thought of doing otherwise. So that was like a big thing for me, and that I wanted to get across why someone might be forced to take action.
Yeah, and I think the nature of parenting in itself is just so compelling, to have this insanely close relationship with this creature, this little human being that you're raising, and when that baby or that child is in danger, you're just your fight or flight instincts just kick in. And like you say, like quisling to rebel is the kind of thing that's the kind of change that you can go through, this metamorphosis that we touched upon, like how parents mold children and children mold parents. It's like the compelling nature of being a parent and your relationship with that child is enough to push you over the edge to do something that you never thought you would ever do.
Yeah, and it's quite primal, isn't it? And I'm sure we've all been in situations like soft plays or schools where, another adult in some way threatens or criticizes or threatens your child, and you suddenly come out all like, you really kind of get the testosterone, or the estrogen going up, whatever it is, the hormones come up, and you really get quite primal about it.
Yeah, it's like, what the fuck did you say about my kid?
Yeah.
Dan, what about you? How did you incorporate parenting into your writing? Why did you decide to do that in the first place?
Well, with Swashbucklers, it was really a very superficial. I thought it would be kind of fun to see what it would be like to have to parent and do crazy things like, saving the world at the same time. And then it became about therapy for myself and just pouring all these feelings and emotions and thoughts about what I was doing and the challenges I was facing into a story and putting my poor characters through the mill. And I really wanted to sort of, we've seen parents in fiction and science fiction and fantasy, but I hadn't really experienced parenting itself and the challenges and the, you look on your friends' Facebook accounts and they're all happy, smiling photos on holiday and stuff, and you're sitting there and your kids are screaming at each other, and it's just not the reality I found.
The outer facade of social media.
Yeah, and I'm sure it is just that facade, and everyone's going through the same things. But sometimes it just felt a bit lonely, experiencing those obstacles. And I really wanted to, when I started pouring it onto the page, I really wanted to explore that.
Yeah, I love how you explain it as sort of therapy, and that's something I think we will get into, is writing about parenting as therapy for parenting.
Well, that's why I'm here. I'm here to unload.
vent to everybody. Gabriela, what about you?
So I think that parenthood and the kind of the real side of parenthood, as we would maybe look at it, like what Dan describes, is sort of underrepresented. It has been underrepresented historically in fantasy and sci-fi, and I think it is strange because it is such a crucial human experience, not just being a parent, but having a parent. That relationship, that bond is so defining. Like Caroline said, it shapes you, it defines you for later life, and you pass all those things on. And so in my adult book, The Second Bell, what the premise of the story is that in this isolated village in the mountains, sometimes a child is born with two hearts, and such a child is rejected as a monster by the community and is put on a edge of a forest and just kind of abandoned and forgotten. And every now and again the child, its mother, decides to leave with that child, and so my book is about a mother and daughter who's basically, the mother made the decision to leave with the child even though she doesn't know if that child is or isn't a monster. That's the point. As a parent, you don't know the end of a story. You don't know if you don't know if you're making the right decision. She didn't know if she made the right decision. This was a kind of this primal thing. And also it's important to me to show, like, you know, that not every mother would have made this kind of heroic choice as we'd see it. I think it's important to show a variety of motherhood journeys, of parenting journeys, of this, you know, when you balance out the pressures of a society versus the, you know, the need to parent your child and to protect your child, you get different results from different people, and it's all very complicated. And also, you know, it's hard. People like to judge mothers, especially if they're not doing things right, or if they're, you know, if they're not perfect, if they don't show affection in exactly the right way, or if they don't spend the time with their kids in exactly the right way. And I think it's important to show the variety of journeys and the variety of results it can produce. So in my sort of upcoming children's book, The Wind Child, the main protagonist, Mara, has a really affectionate, loving father who dies. And her mother is a minor god. She's a daughter of a god of winter winds. And by our kind of modern standards, she's very cold. She doesn't know how to show affection. You know, bless her, she tries, but she doesn't. They're essentially like different species. She doesn't, the language of love is different. The language of, you know, how you communicate is different. And I've seen, it's interesting, maybe I shouldn't go on Goodreads, but I think, you know, people interpret, I know, but people interpret that relationship in different ways. And it's interesting for me to see how people read it, because to me, it's like, you know, this, you know, the child might feel lonely because their needs are not being met. It doesn't mean that the parent wants to not meet their needs. It might there might be a difference in the love language. There might be a difference in the kind of abilities to show affection, and it's very interesting to me. And I like to show those relationships that are kind of different to what the archetypes are of especially, I mean, motherhood, especially because that's kind of, you know, that's sort of close to my heart. And also that tends to be the relationship that's most sort of boxed in terms of stereotypes and archetypes, I think. So
yeah, that's an interesting point, because the archetypes, there's this dichotomy between fatherhood and motherhood. And so much of the time, you know, just because of, I don't know if it's a result of just sort of culture, or if it's something that permeates into culture through things like media and what have you, that fatherhood has kind of been associated with like negligence and just this carefree negligence that has been accepted by a lot of people. But motherhood, on the other hand, gets judged so harshly when there's any sort of misstep, like you say. And I feel like now perhaps we're in a generation where the fatherhood angle is finally shifting towards being more motherly, I guess, being more present, being more active, being more loving. And like you say, like figuring out a love language that doesn't involve, oh, I get home, I'm going to give you a kiss on the head, I'm going to go smoke a cigarette, drink a whiskey, and sit by the fire, or some shit like that, you know? There's like this changing perception that I think all of you, through the work that you are doing, is helping to shift the Overton window of what fatherhood means in relation to motherhood, and then hopefully also pull back the criticisms of motherhood in such a way to show that it's like, this is a flawed process, what we do as parents. It's very flawed, and you need to accept that from both mothers and fathers. There can be no unequal judgment to either side. And Ron, I'll throw the same question to you that I've been asking everybody. Why did you incorporate parenting in your writing?
I mean, I think like Dan, it probably started out as a bit of therapy, because it's kind of funny, because you're talking about the way that people view moms and dads, and I very much wrote a dad who's probably considered fairly stereotypical, and he's the one who works, and he's, you know, always gone, and he's somewhat negligent and absent. But whereas I was a stay-at-home dad until my kids went to school, so I was never physically absent from them. So I got to see all the steps in life and everything. So now that I'm thinking about it, it's kind of funny that I decided to write more of a stereotypical dad than a stay-at-home dad. I mean, it worked for the story, I think. But no, at the time, it was, like I said, it was therapy because I'd been writing for a long time and was getting frustrated, not getting anywhere with it, and also being frustrated with how much time the writing took, whether my wife was home to watch the kids so I could take a break, or even if the girls were napping, trying to cram and writing that time. So it was just years upon years of being frustrated and not feeling like I was getting anywhere. So I kind of wanted to write a book about that without actually writing about a writer. Because
so meta.
Yeah, right. I mean, honestly, the whole thing's a metaphor for creativity to sound somewhat snooty, but it's just, that's how it came out. Just frustration with that, I think. It was a very selfish book. I mean, in some ways, because it was about me. It was about my problems. I just happened to use my family as a vehicle for that. Sorry.
That's what they're there for.
Right. Well,
it's a very good book.
Thank you.
Guys. I read it. Ron's book's really good.
And Ron, now that you look back on it, knowing about your personal experiences as a father, and the character that you created as being more of that absentee parent, how do you sort of compare your own personal experience to that now that you have published the book and it's out there in the world and you can just kind of see it for what it is?
It's easy to look at it now and think, oh, well, it was fine. I wasn't absent. I didn't hide away from my family while I was trying to write. I got a book out. It did what I wanted to do. It was totally worth it. And it absolutely is worth it. I'm still stunned that it actually happened. But I do think that to a certain extent, it makes me more aware now of the time I do take for myself to do that, to write. Versus, making sure that everyone's going to sit down and play a game, then I might want to write, but I'll have to wait. This is fine. Writing can wait. And maybe that's part of it too, the pressure of wanting to succeed and not succeeding. It's there. It's changed because it never goes away when it comes to publishing. But I've kind of crossed that hurdle that I was trying to jump for a long time. And so I feel like personally, I might be de-stressing just a little bit when it comes to feeling so anxious to get something done that I have to focus all my free time on writing. And now I'm I can focus 75% of my free time on writing,
But you can feel okay. It's all the pressure is self-inflicted,
Oh, it's completely in my head, 100%. No one else would ever look at me and think, oh, you're such an asshole. You're so, no. They just tell me I'm crazy, but it's fine. I mean, but it allows for some nice, introspection, I guess.
Yeah, well, this is actually perfect to kind of jump off on the next topic. Katie Tree in the comments wrote that something that she pulled from Swashbucklers was trying to find that balance between being a parent your child needs and being your own person at the same time. And I think this is so important, especially as professionals, people who care about writing and care about expressing their creativity, but then also they care about the experience of being a parent and the role that they play in raising and mentoring these children. So I guess this is the big question as a writer / parent is, how does parenthood affect your actual ability to write stories? And how do you sort of balance that? I like to compare, it's a book and a family is sort of the same thing. It's both about time management. One's a project and one is a living experiment, pretty much. But for all of you, I'll do this classroom style. Raise your hand if you have something to say. How is it for you? How is it for all of you in terms of finding that balance between raising a family and also being a writer? Caroline, go for it.
I'll just say it straight away because my kid is only one still, so it's been a bit of a baptism of fire. Really hard. That's what it is. It's really difficult. So I was in the middle of writing something when he was born, and I think I thought maybe I'd find time. You see pictures. Obviously, we've already touched on it a little bit about how you think of the ideal situation. With babies, you see pictures of them lovely asleep in cots and things, and you think, oh, there'll be loads of little snippets of time. hell no.
Instagram parenthood. Yeah.
No, well, I was blessed
Fuck
with a
that.
child that you can't put down, like ever. So for the first 4 months or so, I didn't get a chance to really write anything. I wrote some notes, maybe in my phone, when I was pushing a pram around, such is my life, to get him to sleep, and that was it. And it was really frustrating, and because I was so tired. And it was such a hard thing because he was quite a colicky baby. He had reflux, all sorts of things, tongue ties. There was a lot of challenges, and I felt like, as well as helping him with all of that, I needed to express myself in some way because I just disappeared. I was so tired. I felt very much like a ghost. And so when he got to about 4 or 5 months old, maybe, I deliberately said, look, I need at least like half an hour during the day to just do something for me where I can feel like me. And I don't tend to go on about introvert, extrovert, but I am very much the traditional introvert in that I need some time inside my head just to process the day. And writing was that for me. And so getting that time back felt amazing, and it really helped me to feel like a full person again, who wasn't just this ghost who did things and didn't really think about anything. So I've had to be so meticulous in terms of time. So I have like a time slot in the evening that I can write in, and I need to go straight from doing one thing to straight to doing that. And I need to do it, and it works for me. And as a result, we've set up like a nice desk, because also where I used to work is now his bedroom. So I've got like another desk now, and I've made it quite nice. So it's like a nice space to be in. And it's just about being quite strict with myself, but it's worked out quite well, I think. And I think for me, having such a small, definite slot when I have to do it has actually made me be more efficient in that, because I probably would have just faffed around before and like go on Twitter for 10 minutes and then just file a few things for another 10 minutes. But I just know if I do that, then I won't ever achieve anything. So it's made me probably better in lots of ways. And I don't feel like my pace has slowed too much, considering my time has been slashed. So yeah, for me, it's just made me more efficient, hopefully better as well, because I'm trying harder. But yeah.
Yeah, but like you say, the efficiency thing is, yes, your time is slashed, of course, but the efficiency factor comes in when you realize, shit, I got half an hour. There's no time to fuck around. Like, I need to just get to it and like put my ideas down on paper. Whatever it comes out, just like vomit, salad, just whatever mess it comes out, like that's how it has to be. You can come back and edit later. That's totally cool.
Yes. And I feel like I don't have as much time to read either at the moment.
Yeah,
and that affects things quite a lot. I mean, I read an awful lot of picture books, and some of them are great. But you need a bit of balance, don't you, really?
Exactly.
But that's affected things as well, I think, because again, I felt a bit lost in terms of my voice when I was writing stuff down. But I've tried again to carve in even just 10 minutes a day where I can just sit, just me with a book, and that's helped a lot too. But yeah, that's definitely been a bit of a sacrifice.
Anyone else want to get in on this? Gabriela, go for it. Gabriela raised her hand.
Yes, I was, I was a good student.
You broke the rules, Ron.
A stars across the board. So I think when I had my first child, I was kind of, because I've always been writing, drawing or whatever. And when I had my first kid, that was this razor sharp focus that came in, as a sort of internal pressure as well, where I realized either I make time for this, either I prioritize this as a thing that's important to me, or it will not happen. And so that made me kind of really discipline myself, learn how to be more organized in that, to make space for that in my life, and to sort of do it regularly, and also I think there is this internal pressure where you do want to be, well, maybe not a role model, that's quite like an old-fashioned concept, but you do want to show your children that it's important to also prioritize the things that are kind of like your core happiness, can't be neglected, you know, and I have 2 girls, you know, how can I be teaching them over like feminist principles while at the same time forgetting about my own development and forgetting myself? And it's important to me to model that for them. But it's like, you know, I spend as much time with them as I can. I mean, I'm very fortunate in that I've been a stay-at-home mom for the last 5 years. So in that sense, that's, you know, I know it's like a privilege to be able to do that. But also it would be very easy to just sort of forget that creative stuff, because, you know, especially at the beginning, nobody's waiting for it. It's not bringing any money or, you know, anything like that. But it's important to sort of show to the kids that, like, you know, when you grow up, like, you can do whatever you want in terms of, you know, you can sort of pursue those pretty out there careers and stuff like that. And it's important, and it is respected in the family. And, you know, my husband's really supportive of that, and to them as well. Like, I feel like it models something for them that's quite important, that, you know, when you do have a life partner, like, he has to see what's important to you, and it has to be important to him as well, because your happiness depends upon it. So I think it's like, it's not just about you anymore. You have to kind of show to the kids that, you know, how to be happy. You're modeling how to be happy and content in your life as well to kids.
Yeah,
not just,
and it's also it's this balance between this is something that I at the moment I'm sort of teaching my son how to be respectful towards other things. And this includes spiders. This includes like whatever he finds outside, because I live in Ecuador and there's just all kinds of weird creatures everywhere. And I try to teach him, like, the spider, even though it looks like something that you might be afraid of or want to squish or whatever, because he loves pinching stuff. I teach him, you have to be respectful to the spider, because the spider helps us in return by eating all the nasty flies and mosquitoes and whatnot. And so I think this is really important as a parent, is to be showing your kids that in order to be respectful towards other people, you also have to be respectful towards yourself. You have to respect the things that you love, and that outwardly will show to other people, and they will in turn respect you, and you will have a better understanding of how to nourish them, and to sort of, like a really good partnership, a really good marriage, whatever, feed each other in this positive feedback loop that's not taking away from the things that you love, but also being respectful of what the other person needs, what your kids' needs are, what your husband or your wife or your partner's needs are. And at the same time thinking, just give me 30 fucking minutes. I'm gonna just like do my piece for this book. I really need it. And if that person gives it to you, it's like, thank you. I love you. I know that you respect me. I respect you back. Yes. That was my rant. Alex, Dan, do either of you want to get in on this too?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I've learned is just to avoid perfectionism. I mean, the first book I wrote, I literally scribbled it by hand in a notebook on a train while I was commuting. So I do kind of half an hour there, half an hour back, and sometimes it'd be complete nonsense. I don't, you know, I was fine with that. You bash it into shape later, and I think that helped when, so you know, when I then became a teacher, and you know, now I only ever write in the school holidays when I've got my kids running around the whole time, you know, running in, asking me to settle a dispute about Pokemon or asking for a biscuit or whatever. And it kind of means I'm at peace with the fact I'm not going to be a perfect parent. I'm not going to be a perfect writer. I'm just going to kind of do both of them equally badly and just kind of, you know, be a bit of a slightly crap parent, a slightly crap writer, and just not feel the need to be perfect. And it doesn't matter if the house is a bit of a state. It doesn't matter if they're getting a bit hungry. I'm good with that. I can live with it.
Yeah. Be humble, be happy.
Be humble.
I mean, feed your children, but, you know.
Yeah,
and yourself. Feed
let
yourself
them get
too. No biscuits today.
Yeah.
And Dan, what about you?
Did Ron have? I mean, I've got something to say, but
No, say it. Go.
Ron did raise his hand a minute ago. And
it was a last minute raise.
He
doesn't
broke.
count.
He broke
I did.
the rules, so he has to wait till the end.
I'm in timeout right now.
Yeah, you're on timeout, man. I'm gonna mute you.
Well,
for it,
I mean, the thing I would say is that while you're all saying amazing things about how it can and should work, sometimes you just have to accept that it doesn't. There is only so far you can push it, and it is so hard to try and balance this. And I've done this as a stay-at-home dad. I've done this freelancing. I've done this in a full-time job, and it's hard no matter how you structure it, on no matter how much support you have around you, and then you throw in a fucking pandemic.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just goes wrong, and you just have to sort of gather yourself and always make sure you put the kids first. But it's so important to try and maintain that your individualism and your needs as well. And if you don't, that's when things do go wrong. And there's no harm in sort of acknowledging that and coming back around and trying to rebuild. And it can be done, and lots of people do it. And sometimes, the balance does work, and sometimes it just gets fucked up and you have to start again, and that's fine.
Yeah. This happens to me all the time, where it's like, I'm putting my son to bed and it takes way longer than I thought it would. And I have this idea in my head of something that I want to write down. I'm just like, shit, please remember. And this goes on for like 20 minutes. And then I just like run to the nearest thing that I can write down on and just try and scribble some version of whatever I had in my head. And at the end of the day, it's like, you can't blame the kid. You just have to be content with the circumstances and know that when the time is right, the time is right. And if it's not happening, then shit luck, that's life, and that's parenting.
I mean, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I totally relate to the putting the baby to bed taking a lot longer, because that's my slot. I put him to bed, and then I have to sort of waddle into the next room and turn the laptop on and spend a little bit of time doing that. So the longer it takes, you can't help it. But the longer it takes, I think, right, okay, I've only got 45 minutes. I've only got half an hour. And now I'm like, is there any point even turning the laptop on? Because it'll take me that long to remember where I'm up to. So I can relate to that.
And then ideas just being so ephemeral as they are. It's like, ciao. Yeah.
Gone.
All right, Ron, your time out has been annulled.
Thank you. I think it's two things. Like you guys were saying, the whole idea of maintaining a sense of self, even when you're a parent, because I think there are a lot of parents out there who believe that you have to give everything to your kids, and that when you don't, you're somewhat self-centered. And both my wife and I have always been like, look, you have to do things for yourself. You got to balance it, obviously. But if you give up all of yourself to your kids, then you have nothing left, and all that does is embitter you toward them and toward life and yourself, and it's just 100%. Not healthy, And in terms of efficiency, I actually think so. Like Gabriela, I've been lucky that my wife was able to work. I stayed home with the girls, and even now I work. She's a teacher, and I work part-time at the school. So I have days when I'm at home, and I can write most of the day, until I have to go get everyone. But I actually think I'm less efficient now than I was when I had to cram it. And it's awful, because I can sit there, I can fuck around, and I can just, I can get on Twitter, I can look out the window, I can avoid, my dogs, that sort of thing. Like they're fine. Well, the one threw up on the bed last night, so that was fun. That's like having toddlers again, little babies. But no, my first child, and I got spoiled with her. Like when she hit maybe one or so, she would sleep 3 hours in the afternoon, like 3 hours straight. It was incredible. And of course, that was the time I decided to write my first book, and it worked out great. And then the second one comes along, did not enjoy napping at all. And so my entire schedule was shot. But then, you learn to cram it in 45 minutes here. You take them to like gymnastics or something, not when they were so young with that, but as they get older and they're doing things somewhat on their own, you bring your laptop everywhere you go. And you write 20 minutes, you write 10 minutes, 45 minutes, 3 hours, whatever. And I think that actually made me a better writer and better able to focus. And so now I'm starting to lose that focus. I have to figure out how to bring that back. I think that's been the tough part right now.
Now it's all back to self-discipline, my friend.
It is. And it's awful.
Self-discipline is a bitch. Oh,
it's
man.
The worst.
I want to kind of tie this back. I love everything that you've all been sharing. I kind of want to bring this back to to actual writing and the writing that you all have done, and how you chose to incorporate your parenting experiences into the speculative fiction space. And so I'm going to toss this out to everyone, hands up, and I'll call you out. Why did you feel that science fiction or fantasy was the space to explore these ideas in your writing? Who wants to go first? Dan, go for it.
For me, it was to make it fun. Sorry, my dog's going nuts in the background. It was to make it fun because it was supposed to be a fun, enjoyable romp. She's picked the loudest toy as well. I don't know what she's playing at. So I wanted to make it fun, and that's why I wanted to include parenting in it. And because it's science fiction and fantasy, I could go to the extremes of it. You know, you have to save the world from ghosts and monsters and things, but also you need to get a babysitter. And I thought there was some kind of fun in that juxtaposition. And then when the pandemic hit, while I was finishing the book off, it was strange, because then we all actually started living the experience of having to parent in an extreme environment and having these unusual thoughts like, you know, I need to wash down all the shopping because what if my kids get this virus that shut down the world? I mean, this was early on, but you know, we were having these kind of unusual parenting experiences. So then it became, I think I found it more relatable while I was writing. So it wasn't as extreme, but it became a lot more, I was able to relate to it a lot more because we were going through some weird shit in the real world as well. But I definitely started out, you know, finding it more enjoyable to play with the extremes and of parenting in a fantasy or science fiction setting.
Mm-hmm. It's like we're living in an absurdist world, and now we have to write absurdist fiction too.
Yeah, and now I feel like I didn't push it far enough.
It's too tame, Dan. It's too tame.
I know.
Anyone else? Caroline, you look like you had something to say, but Ron put up his hand first, so it's all you,
go Ron. I'll go after Ron.
You got it, buddy.
Well, my answer is pretty simple. I mean, I read and write science fiction and fantasy. Like, I can't fathom not having some weird element in the books, you know, that I write or read. I try to read contemporary and wind up just not. So it just lent itself, you know, it was just what I was going to write. Mm-hmm. And it worked. And also for my book in particular, it was the quick pitch is this guy's children disappear. Like, he uses a VR unit, something goes wrong, and when he kind of comes to, his children are gone, like wiped out of existence. No one remembers them. And so that was like when I kind of came up with that idea. I mean, science fiction was the perfect thing, especially a VR headset. It was just the perfect way to wipe someone out of existence, you know.
And then you got to take a deep dive into the technology and find your kids. Oh, man. The book's called Deep Dive, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm a dad, man. I can make any kind of dad joke I want. I'm moderating this panel.
That's your job.
Exactly. Caroline, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, mine's just a little answer too, I guess. But it's just, I mean, whatever I'm writing, I kind of like imagining what if. And what if we're given more choices to make in life? What if we have more options to help us live? And with sci-fi, I particularly like kind of quite domestic near future sci-fi, simply because it makes the potentially awful results of these situations feel very probable and feel very real. So you could go anywhere and create any world in your book, but it feels like it could actually happen. And that's like a little mental connection to it. And that, in my head, kind of makes things even more disturbing and real. And that's the kind of stuff I like to write. I like to write disturbingly real things. So yeah, for me, it's just because you can mold it to any shape you like. But it feels very real, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I think that's an uncanny ability of science fiction and fantasy. Horror too is to take the surreal, take things that are imaginative and use them as a blanket for whatever kind of twisted, messed up shit you want to talk about your own
Yeah.
life, or just in general, the ideas that you have, but you can just kind of infuse it all within, real experiences within a surreal setting.
Totally. And in Composite Creatures, really, it's almost like the present day. There's just a couple of things that have advanced technologically, which mean that we have options that we can make in terms of trying to live a little bit longer and live a better life. So it's just a very small twist. And, this could be a few years in the future. This could be 10 years, 5 years, 20 years. You don't know. But I'd like to make people think, what would I do in that situation? I know I was. And I hope I don't necessarily do what my main character does, but you never know. You never know.
Yeah, that's why characters exist. They exist
exactly.
to fulfill our darkest fantasies.
Yeah, exactly.
Gabriela, Alex, do either of you want to jump in?
Sure. Well, I think that I like writing fantasy purely because I like the idea of adding like the magical elements to the world and creating the world, and that feels real. And so I don't think there's necessarily like a massive connection about why I chose to explore kind of the issues of parenting in my books, them being fantasy. It's just I write fantasy and that feels sort of natural to me, but I'm very interested in the kind of relationships with like intergenerational relationships and sort of multi-generational families and things like that. So so that's kind of close to my heart. And I think in fantasy and sci-fi, people who don't read fantasy and sci-fi often sort of think about it as a like this is like all of this is just not real. Like these are the world situations that are not real. But to me, it's like, you're still supposed to write real people just in those very extreme scenarios. And it doesn't matter if there's dragons flying overhead. The characters still need to feel like real people. And it allows you, I suppose, because of the kind of extreme situations, extreme worlds, it allows you to explore multitude of different scenarios within one sort of character's journey. And yeah, it's just fun. But it's bottom line is it's real people, and it's just a different genre of what else you add into the mix. But
yeah, you touched on a really cool thing, because of course people who aren't into sci-fi and fantasy, they just kind of judge it from the outside, and they're judging a genre by its cover, as opposed, and probably individual books too, but they don't really understand that once you dig into it, you realize that these don't necessarily have to be human experiences. They can be human-like experiences to the point where it's an empathetic experience. And therefore, we can place ourselves in the position of whatever POV character is on the page. And you can just relate to it. You can relate to the arc. You can relate to the relationships and everything. One of my favorite books is Adrian Tchaikovsky's Children of Time. And that book made me empathize with spiders, And I love spiders. And the fact that this book is just like presenting POV spider characters and I can empathize with them. It's like, cool, that is a human-like experience that is only possible in science fiction or fantasy, and it's so cool. So I love that you brought that up, Gabriela, because there's way too much external judgment on these genres that can provide such fruitful explorations of what it means to be human or experience something in a human-like fashion. And then on top of that, parenting, it's like, how do you experience parenting in a way that somebody can empathize with it, or just feel disgusted or something, and it's like someone who's not a parent can get a glimpse into what it might be like to be a parent. And someone who is a parent can be like, oh man, like you're speaking to me. It's the pain and the trauma.
I think the ideal is, people start reading a book maybe with some like preconceptions of it, like, oh well, I've read what the sort of premise is. In this situation I would have definitely acted like this, or like like in the second, but like, oh, if I was a mother whose like child was rejected by the society, I would have definitely left with that child and like protected her no matter what. But I like if I was successful, it would have been in like, you know, in portraying what I want to portray. Is like I want people to sort of question it, maybe, and like, would you have really like this when you're brought up in a society that tells you that this is the only truth and this is the way we live, and you know, people who do this other thing are kind of, you know, are deluded at best, and they're sort of perpetuating evil in the world. Like, I think that, you know, even though the scenario is, you know, there's some magic, there's like folkloric elements, so it feels out there. But I think there's a lot of parents who live in communities that tell them that, you know, you're supposed to put the rules of the community above the needs of your children, above what your instinct is towards your children. So it's all very well, like, you know, thinking like, yes, but I would have done this, but
would you?
But that's a thing. Like, you know, you can't be certain. You can't be completely certain until you are in this situation. And I think sort of exploring that is important. And fantasy does give you the space to explore those issues in a way that maybe doesn't feel so loaded in a real world, if you see what I mean. Yeah. Like, you know, because this is not a book about any particular religion or about a particular ethnic group. It's not like about the issues of a particular group, but it's sort of, by being in a world that's almost like a parallel to ours, that is different to ours, it gives us the option to sort of create something maybe a bit more universal. So this is like, I'm not asking questions about your particular experience. This is a question about more like, you know, what ifs. Yeah, if it makes sense, just to sort of transfer it.
Yeah, and this ties really nicely into Alex. If you want to discuss a little bit the same topic, you know, your book takes place in a society that is more controlling of what people do and think, and obviously your character is a bit more of a lemming who breaks out of the shell of obedience, you know. And that's exactly what Gabriela is saying. It's like, what would you do in a circumstance where the society itself is so different from your own that the possibilities of what you would do given the circumstances of this POV character or what's going on around them, what would you do, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's similar to Caroline and Gabriela. The kind of the concept came first, and the what if idea was the first thing I came up with. And in a way, I didn't, although I really wanted to explore the parenting element and the relationship with his son, I didn't want to make that his defining characteristic. One of my kind of bugbears is about single dads is that, similar to what Gabriela was saying earlier about you know, stereotypes of you know, the mother and the father, it's a real, the single dad trope is a real cliche, and like it becomes a defining characteristic. Just all a single dad is defined by is his quest for a female mate who can help him, you know, bring up the child. It's very rare to get just a single dad character who is they happen to be a single dad, as opposed to, you know, a lot of single mothers. You get some quite interesting, nuanced single mothers in fiction and in film, but I feel like single dads, they're either these tragic characters or these pathetic comic characters who, how could they possibly do a nappy kind of thing. So, you know, I was quite keen to make it just one aspect of his character was, you know, the fact he happened to be a single dad, without making it this all-encompassing thing. You know, this quest to find a you know, someone to help him bring up his son.
I'm useless. Please help me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Dads can be self-sufficient too.
It goes back to kind of, you know, 3 Men and a Baby and all those films. And remember, did anybody watch Big Daddy and all this nonsense? And,
yeah.
It's quite sort of, they all just kind of stand around.
Yeah.
What are we going to do this?
There's a new film with I think it came out last year with Kevin Hart called Parenthood. I think that's
yes,
the name of it. Which starts very tropey, and this guy is basically just like, the kid's shitting, and it's just like holding the baby out like this. It's like, that's not how it works, man. But I guess it kind of flipped it on its head. And by the end, the dad realizes like, I can be self-sufficient and an individual, and at the same time raise this kid and provide them with the love and attention that, you know, not necessarily fulfilling 100% their needs of what love and attention they need, but what he's capable of. And I think that's the kind of back and forth of this like love language that Gabriela mentioned earlier is, you know, even if you're a single parent, you can find the right balance in your love language with your child and provide them as much as you can while also sustaining yourself and sustaining the whole situation of family and household and work and food and changing diapers. That doesn't involve just like sticking a kid out and just watching the poo dribble on the floor. It's like, no, change that diaper, you figure it out, you know, things are going to work out. It's okay.
I think if I can just add something to what Alex was saying, Adrian, I find it quite interesting how in patriarchal societies in general, I come from a very patriarchal country, Poland. It's been my experience that the way that one of the results of the sort of, you know, of misogyny basically is that fathers suffer, because if being nurturing is seen as sort of a lower level characteristic, and caring for your children is seen as a sort of very menial job that belongs to one sex only, then it creates this expectation of incompetence in men. And I think, you know, women add to that as well. Like, I know a lot of women who's basically, they expect their partner to be an incompetent father. And there's this psychological process I've read about, which is called like the Caliban Syndrome. So basically, the way you treat someone and the way you see someone makes them behave the way you've set up your expectations for them to behave.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it's quite interesting to just how deep it goes. So when you basically treat, like, you know, there's this expectation, like there's this saying that one of the kind of older women I know like told me, I don't remember who, but like in Poland, it's like, oh, a man's interest in his children only lasts as long as his interest in their mother.
Oof.
And I was so gobsmacked when I heard that, because that is like a very deep kind of, and it robs both men and women, and, you know, and it robs the children. So I think like all those tropes are this kind of perpetuate this myth, so that like boys grow up watching this and they think that they have to grow up being incompetent around their children, because otherwise that will make them less masculine.
Exactly.
And breaking out of that is not as easy as, you know, as sometimes we want to sort of make it out.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm living in South America, and the perception of masculinity and fatherhood here is so warped from my perspective as someone who grew up in Canada. And things are a lot more malleable there. There's a lot more fluidity in terms of what your role can be and how you can sort of fit into things and have it be not only accepted, but championed. And I've had to push against a lot of barriers while I'm here. You know, it's like, I'm a husband who likes to cook. And my first Christmas here was so weird because all the men were in the other room drinking. And I was in the kitchen with the women, you know, and they found that weird, but slowly like the paradigm has shifted within my wife's family, where her dad is more involved in the kitchen now. And now I'm a stay-at-home dad, and my mom, my mother-in-law is so appreciative of that, because she raised 3 kids for the most part on her own, and she knows the struggle of like being a parent is 24/7 job. It is the hardest job in the world. And so she appreciates that a lot, and my father-in-law really respects that, you know. because my wife has the fortune of working with him at their family company. So there's a lot of barriers that are slowly being chipped away, but it takes a lot of time to do that. And it takes a lot of effort. And you really have to show people through lived experience and through lived demonstration, like whatever you were thinking before, you know, whether you're in Poland or whether you're in Ecuador or wherever you are, that things don't always have to stay the same, you know? And that's the purpose of story too, is to show something that seems like a solid state at the beginning, but through the actions of the POV character and the world that's shifting around them, that solid state becomes more fluid and things change for hopefully the better, you know? And Gabriela, you brought up tropes. I feel like there's so many freaking tropes. Alex too, just about single dads. Ron, Caroline, Dan, do you have any tropes that you see about parenthood and really just hate, or at the very least, like actively try to subvert through the fiction that you're writing? Who wants to go?
I mean, when it comes to my book, it's not the best example of parenting in any way, but it's somebody who wants to do the right thing, but necessarily doesn't. And also, it's difficult to describe in terms of composite creatures because the elements of parenthood, which become more and more apparent towards the end, aren't necessarily the usual ones. So it's a really difficult one to talk about because I can't say too much because it'll give away some elements of the plot. But I guess when I was writing it, I was not really that interested in creating cliched superhero parent figures. These were people who were just very much their own person, and I told the story in first person. So my main character, Nora, doesn't even understand herself the full impact of her parentage on her and the way that she is parenting this creature that comes into her life quite early in the book. So it's for the reader to kind of piece together what is happening and what Nora necessarily isn't doing right, but she thinks she's doing the right thing. But I'm always quite interested to explore grey characters and characters who are given choices to make and don't necessarily make the right ones or follow authoritarian figures quite blindly. So many characters in stories and films rally against something, and it's great, and it's really satisfying to read and watch those things. But I decided to do the entire opposite and write about somebody who, and the consequences of someone who does follow systems quite blindly and the dangers of that. But people have to read it to find out what I'm talking about because I can't even say any more than that.
But that's a subversion that I think is really worth exploring because there are culture is this omnipresent thing, and especially culture as it channels through family, and the way that you think of how am I going to be as a parent is usually I look at my own parents and see what do I appreciate or not appreciate, or what do I like or not like about how my parents raised me. And sometimes people follow their parents blindly and pass on from one generation to the next some sort of it doesn't necessarily have to be like blatant trauma, but there's a lot of shit that we can pass on to our kids unknowingly just because we follow something blindly. Yes. whether it's what the generation before us did, whether it's the moms that we follow on Instagram, whatever it is. It's like you need to
when you feel desperate and lost in a situation, you ask for advice and you trust people and you trust that they know more than you do. And if you just follow blindly what everyone tells you to do, you can end up in quite a devastating place, as my book demonstrates. So
quite a pickle.
That was what I wanted to do.
Cool.
It's a very happy book.
Yeah.
It's really
Ron, what about you? Some tropes or subversions when it comes to parenting?
I mean, I don't think I actively set out to subvert tropes, but listening to everyone and thinking about it now, I definitely, my main character is very much not like me in that he's the one who works. He's the one who's obsessed with work. I mean, as much as I'm obsessed with writing, we're similar in that way. But so in that, I guess, context, he is somewhat stereotypical. But I guess if I did inadvertently subvert that, it was because he's so concerned with his relationship with his children. He doesn't make good decisions about the time he spends with them versus how much he goes to work, which can, I think, probably can come across as a bit of an unlikable character at first. But I'd like to think that that's not necessarily the way someone like him would have been written maybe 20 years ago. And so maybe I inadvertently subverted that without meaning to, you know. But it's funny too, thinking about tropes when you guys were talking about the perception of men. When I first was a stay-at-home dad, people would constantly call me Mr. Mom, that Michael Keaton movie from way back in, and it would drive me fucking crazy because he was a moron. And I'm like, but you know me, I'm not like that. But it was more of it was the thing they just said. There was no like real malice behind it, you know. But the fact that it still persisted and still probably does now, you know. And so maybe that's it with my book. I wanted to show a father who was obsessed with work, but was very much also very concerned with the relationship with his kids. Because like you said, I think that stereotypically dads are the ones who are sometimes allowed to not have a good relationship with the kids, at least in the early years. Or they convince themselves they're not supposed to. They feel like maybe they're not. Like you said, showing affection, not a very manly thing. But I mean, that's modern dads now.
Yeah. It's like, how
But
dare
that's
you
the
hug
thing.
your
It's
child?
just robbing not just the children, but the dads of that relationship. Like I find that this is the most sort of galling thing. Sorry to sort of jump in that, you know, that maybe modern dads are sort of just, you know, are realizing that, you know, that their parents maybe or grandfathers, they would have been robbed of that relationship that they could have had, of those experiences. And you know, when you actually really allow yourself to become a parent and you share that sort of a close relationship with your children, like for all the like difficult, you know, stuff that comes with it, it is so rewarding, and it's such a deeply, you know, human experience, man, to have that taken away because it doesn't fit into a role of some kind. It's just ridiculous, isn't it? Like, I mean, my dad was a very nurturing dad, and my grandfather was, you know, old style, but very nurturing dad as well. And growing up with that, I just look with pity at the people whose sort of environment molded them into this sort of standoffish, like.
Yeah, I
what do you
mean,
guys think?
like it or not, I'm very involved in my kids, and especially as they're getting older and changing, and I know things that are going on, and maybe, you know, other dads they feel uncomfortable with certain things, and maybe my kids will not be happy that I'm as involved as I am as they get older, because my oldest is just about a teenager, but I'm there. So I mean, it's like, you know, grunt on the ground, everything, there's, you know, nothing's off the table. So, and I like that I know everything that's going on, that I'm not squeamish about certain things, that I feel like I'm not supposed to be involved, you know, because I'm the dad.
Yeah. And later on, your kids are going to come back as adults and be like, Dad, thank you for everything that you did.
Exactly. That's exactly what they're
That's
going
what
to
do, right?
Yes. Every day they thank me.
No, when they're like 30, they're going to say that.
Yeah.
As I got older, that's the kind of thing I
On
said
your
to my
deathbed.
parents.
Yeah.
On your deathbed, maybe.
She's like, Dad, I always appreciated you.
Yeah, they'll finally get older and read my book, and they're going to go up to me and, what the hell is this? You know? But
it's like, what's going on in your head, man? What was going on when you were raising us? Dan, do you want to jump in and close up this trope talk?
Well, the trope of, you know, I mean, Caroline from Angry Robot has teased me about the sad dad trope and my love of it at the moment.
She was hoping it would come up. She told
Yeah,
me
she
that.
was. I mean, I don't think anyone bet 1 hour 14 minutes, but Yeah, so Alex, the idea of the pathetic single dad was something I'd leaned into, but I think like Ron, I tried to subvert it in a way that he acknowledges and you see and feel the concern he has for his kids. So he is a pathetic dad, but he knows it, and he feels bad about it, and he does try and acknowledge it and accept it and do better. And yet I also throw in the tropes of, they're sitting in a restaurant early on in the book and his kid's on a tablet with the other kids, and he really half-asses it, trying to get him off it, because he feels like he should, but he also wants him to stay on it so he can keep talking and drinking and having quiet time. So there are some elements of that patheticness that I leaned into heavily because also I do it, and I think it's good to acknowledge that. But I think the way we progress and hopefully mature as a society and evolve this idea of mums and dads and their roles is by maybe acknowledging there is a trope, and then like in Ron's book, which I read recently, having them feel that concern and that understanding that actually they're not doing what they want to do and trying to be better. And I think if we see it through their point of view, I think our kids will hopefully grow up and reading more of that stuff and understanding that the roles are actually more balanced than they have been previously.
Exactly. And everyone tweet at Dan_Hanks on Twitter. Tweet sad dad at him. Show him some love. Show him some love. I kind of wanted to bring the discussion to a close, kind of exploring what the parenthood angle brings to a story in terms of things like stakes or tension, characterization as well, and relationships. All of you have touched on this a little bit, but if anyone wants to explore that a little deeper, like what that parenthood angle offers your story, and offers things like the pacing or the way that a reader could perceive it. Caroline, go for it.
Is that because I went with my eyebrows? I'm ready.
Throwing you under the bus.
Yeah, I mean, I did touch on it a little bit in terms of with composite creatures and writing in first person. A lot of it is hidden. So it's stuff that comes out in little clues or little things that Nora does, little things that she says and maybe even doesn't do, that shows how parenting, in terms of her mother parenting her before she died, and her choices when she parents the thing that she parents in the book. So it's more of a mystery for the reader in my book. But it's also, it really enriches one of the themes of the book, which doesn't often come out in discussions too much, which is legacy, in terms of how powerful that can feel, and how it is like a human need to want to leave something behind once you've died, to live a little longer. In some cases, so for some people it's to write a book and have that last long after you, and for other people it's to leave someone behind who will remember you, and that kind of gives it a bit of a ghostly air, I feel like, as well, because it just reminds us all of our own, not to be depressing, our own mortality, and that the fact that we're not always going to be here, and what people will think of us once we've gone, and how long we'll be remembered for. So that is a theme of composite creatures as well, which I wanted to explore in terms of, would you sacrifice that legacy in terms of if you got to choose between having that and living a little bit longer yourself? So for me, it's sort of a weird answer, that one, but yeah, I don't even know how to summarize what I've said, but yeah, that's the answer.
If parenthood teaches us anything, it's that
and
we are mortal creatures and we're going to die.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes, but it probably also teaches people that as a new parent, I'm quite tired and can't answer questions properly. There you go. Double-edged sword. Yeah, that's mine.
Exactly. Cool. Anyone else?
I
Whoever
mean,
wants to jump in.
I just quite like having the as well as what I've talked about it being a key motivating factor, you know, really driving the plot along. I also just liked having you know, parents as lead characters. I think I've read so many fantastic, you know, sci-fi and fantasy novels where the protagonist is always this kind of a bit of a maverick who's going off on this mission, or he's, you know, he's entirely motivated by his own desires and his own, you know, her own, you know, needs. So to actually have a character that I related to a bit more, I thought was important. I just felt, especially sci-fi and fantasy, that there's not enough parents. You don't see some of the mundane day-to-day realities of parenting. So yeah, for me, that was quite important.
And that's a cool thing about sci-fi. It's like you can have the mundane, but you can make it interesting through just the nature of the science fictional or fantastical world, or the characters and what they're experiencing. Yeah. Ron, Gabriela, Dan, do you want to get in on what Parenthood adds to your books?
Sure. Oh, go.
No, go on. You started.
Gabriela and then Dan.
I think that it's important for me to kind of explore that those relationships, parent-child, go both ways, and that, you know, when, you know, sometimes you have a bit of, you know, parent feeling protective over the child and towards the child, but children feel very protective of their parents as well. And I think there's this mutual push and pull in those relationships, and even for those of us who don't have children, you know, everybody's had parents or, you know, guardians of one form or another. So those attachment figures that, you know, and they always have a huge sort of influence over our lives, and it's you know, in what they do, what they don't do, and I think this is like, you know, this fundamental human experience, this kind of continuity of sort of familiar bonds, and I think it just deserves a lot more space. And I'm very happy to see that in fantasy books that are coming out now, and, you know, sci-fi books like that, it is given the space it deserves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. Dan? After you, sir.
I was just going to say, from a sort of storytelling point of view, and I've only just thought of this, but I should have claimed that it was all intended, but just that because it's I wrote such a fast-paced adventure, the moments where you need to take a breath are actually those parenting moments where you're having like a whispered argument in the kitchen, or you know, in the middle of it, two of my characters who are married have a date night, and those parenting moments, you know, it kind of reflects parenting because it's chaos. And then if you're lucky, you get to go out for a date, you know, to a restaurant for a couple of hours, or even if you just go into the kitchen and just have a chat and shut the door and keep that stuff out. And then you get to have a breather. And, you know, it was kind of interesting structurally how that has worked itself out, because the rest is just chaos. And then you have these little moments of parenting that I think people will probably relate to.
100%. Mm-hmm. It's like little pockets of peace within all the chaos.
Yeah.
And even then, it's not necessarily a pocket of peace, because it could be interrupted at any point, or
it will always be interrupted.
Yeah. Always. I
mean, you know, yeah, it happens. There is a scene where he's on the toilet you know, scrolling Twitter, and he's interrupted, and that's just, you have to embrace that moment of peace.
Yeah.
But it will never.
Ron, would you like to close this out?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, for me, it's like you said, it's those moments of peace. Like the first chapter of my book is basically, it's really the only chapter where you get to see my main character, Peter, as a dad with his children and his wife, like all of them together as a unit, before I decide to, you know, make things awful for him and tear his children away. And so, yeah, for me, I loved writing those moments, because even though the book is science fiction, like you said, you can ground it in reality by having those moments. And I think that alone is enough to hook most people, outside of my book, just in general. When you include those family moments, that's what they're going to relate to, and that's going to kind of keep them going. And I think personally, selfishly, the book was kind of my way of showing people what I was, what was going on in my mind the whole time of wanting to be a writer while being a dad, and so that for me probably was the big impetus behind it when I first started writing that, because it's hard when you talk to people who aren't writers. It's almost impossible to really explain it and get into it, and at a certain point their eyes start to kind of glaze over, and but at least this way with the book, with the story in the beginning and end, I could kind of say, hey, this is what my experience was and has been, and still is.
And that drives the story and
exactly, yeah,
creates an interesting ride with lots of ups and downs and tension. Caroline, go for it. You're so antsy. Go for it.
I just, as a reader, listening to everybody talking about parenting books, it just makes me think as well, as a reader of fantasy and sci-fi, and as someone who's just had a baby in recent years, that as a parent you're expected to be this rock, and then once you have a child, it's all about the child growing up and having adventures and becoming this person. But I love the idea of seeing more parents in sci-fi and fantasy having adventures and doing crazy things. So I'm all for rocks going off and having adventures, and I would love to see more of that, because I think that's quite inspiring and hopeful for people as well, that anything's possible.
And as we all know, even rocks are vulnerable. We get worn down by water and whatever else comes our way.
Erosion.
And Brianna Cinder brought up a very nice comment in the chat. And I think this is a nice point to close out on. First, she said, parenting is so weird. And it is. It's so fucking weird, but it's beautiful at the same time. But also, parents deserve to see themselves in science fiction and fantasy. And I'm appreciative to all of you for incorporating that aspect into your work. So thank you for that. And we'll close out. We'll finish this off if everyone wants to just share some of their books and let people know where they can find them on social media. So we'll start with you, Ron.
I just have the one book out right now, Deep Dive. I'm on Twitter under, God, now I have to remember what my Twitter handle is. Writing Ron. Everything else, Instagram, Facebook, that sort of thing, is Ron Walters Books. That's my website too. But yeah, you can get Deep Dive at most bookstores, Amazon, Waterstones. Most retailers have it online, which is pretty weird, knowing that it's not everywhere, but
you made it, man.
Apparently,
Cool. Thank you, Ron. Yeah. And Alex, what about you? I see you got a physical copy.
Yeah, I like Gabriela's tactic of being able to show it.
Oh, yeah.
Which is one thing we all know about Angry Robot is that they do amazing covers. And
they have such cool covers.
I really love what they've been doing it for years, but that Spider Touch is one which I really loved.
Beautiful.
But Spider Touch available, same places, Amazon, Waterstones, etc. I'm just on Twitter, Mr. Alex Thompson, I think.
Awesome, thank you, Alex. And Dan?
Well, you can find Captain Moxley and the Embers of the Empire and Swashbucklers at the same places. You can see them just behind my head. Courtesy of Angry Robot, who are very nice, and sent me a couple of posters. And I'm on Twitter, Dan_Hanks.
Fantastic. Caroline?
You may have noticed my laptop was moving around because I realized I was resting my laptop on my book, which wasn't good for getting it out to show you, but this is mine. Composite Creatures, available everywhere everyone's just mentioned. And I'm on Twitter as well, which is Caroline H. Writes. And if you find me on there, you can head to the blog and you can see the poetry books that I do as well, which are also weird and quite dark and dystopian too.
True,
if you enjoy
the true
that.
Emotions of a parent. Dark
I know, yes.
Thank you, Caroline. And Gabriela, what about you?
So my books are right here, very handy. So The Second Bell is available in all the big bookshops. A lot of indie bookshops will either stock them or at least make it available for online orders. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Waterstones, things like that. The Windchild is only available in the UK for now. And yeah, Waterstones, indie bookshops, Kenilworth bookshop, which is a lovely independent bookshop, has signed copies, and I link to it on my Twitter usually, which is at Gabriela Houston. So it's easy to find me.
Wonderful.
GabrielaHouston.com is my website as well. So
Yeah.
remember my name, you'll find me.
Remember her name or else. But thank you all so much. Honestly, as a parent, I feel like more of us need to connect with each other and have the opportunity to vent and just share our experiences. And hearing what all of you have gone through makes me feel like I'm not alone, even though we're talking virtually. I really appreciate it. And thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks, Adrian.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Yeah.